Welcome to Ballots and Beyond. I'm Leon Davidoff, West Hartford Town Clerk, and today we have a special guest joining us. Please welcome the esteemed Secretary of the State of Connecticut, Stephanie Thomas. It's an honor to have you on the show, Secretary Thomas.
It is an honor to be here with you, Leon. Thanks for having me. I love talking about ballots.
It's important for everyone to understand their rights and the power of their vote. Through Ballots and Beyond, we aim to educate and empower our viewers, inspiring them to take an active role in shaping the future of our great state and with our own unique communities. So let's begin our conversation this morning with an introduction. So why don't you, Secretary, just briefly describe your background so voters can know how you started and how you became Secretary of State. I think that would be interesting to know about.
When I figure it out, I'd be happy to explain it to your viewers. But seriously, I never thought I'd be involved in politics. I spent my entire career as a nonprofit fundraiser. I opened my own fundraising consultancy about 10 years ago. And I was just going about my life, busy like so many others. And then in 2017, I started volunteering, and I sat on some nonprofit boards and got more involved in my community. And then I realized, hey, there are some different types of voices missing from the table. And I mean that from a very broad perspective, not just female voices, not just black voices, but I said, like, hey, we need more black women who are sci-fi nerds versus black women who maybe read romance novels. Like, we're all different, we're all unique, and we just need as many different types of people around the table as possible. So I ran for state representative. That's a long story in and of itself. I lost that first race by a few hundred votes, but I went back the next cycle, ran again, I won. I served in the House. And when our former secretary decided she would not run for re-election, I thought, wow, that's like a job in government that I would love to have, because it involves two of my favorite things: businesses. As a small business owner myself, I've always been very interested in how you help businesses succeed, and also the democratic process, getting people to register to vote, getting them to get involved in their communities. So I ran for the job, and here I am.
So congratulations on your recent election in 2022, and like myself, we're both new to our roles here, but it seems like there's been a smooth transition to you becoming Secretary of State. Why don't you describe like what a day is like when you arrive in the office to the time you go home? What's an average day? You know,
it has been smooth, surprisingly so. I actually thought it would be much more complicated. It definitely is a steep learning curve. A lot of things are coming at you all at once, but that's what I signed up to do, and I sort of love that. So every day is very different. Sometimes there are things coming to us from the outside, such as, you know, a press inquiry about something that's happening around the state, and we have to find out what's happening. It's a lot of routine data. Like when I first started, we were getting about 1,200 calls a week about annual report filings so with people with questions. So it's just staying on top of the data. I also go and speak at a lot of events around the state. And then, of course, it's just the day-to-day of running an office of about 75 employees, where there's HR situations, where there's technology situations, and just keeping all the trains on the tracks.
Well, I know in the short time I've been town clerk, we've had monthly meetings with your office. You've been quite accessible. You've had people ask many different questions. And what I totally appreciate is if you don't know the answer, somebody on your staff does and readily provides us with the correct information.
Yeah, I tried to set up a lot of different types of systems. Like I said, I come from or maybe I didn't say, I own a consulting company. So for 25 years, I'm very used to customer service, if you will. So I set up monthly calls with the town clerks and also the registrars, because you are the ones who implement our elections and in various capacities. So I thought I need to speak with and hear from everyone directly, and it's been very well received. So I'm excited to keep doing it.
So on the town clerk's front, we greatly appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's been very helpful, and some of the newer people that I've met have said it's a really great opportunity to connect with state government, and we appreciate the partnership, because we're all in this for the same mission. Right.
We all rise or fall together.
That's very true. So this past week we had primaries throughout Connecticut. Do you want to just say how you thought they went, if there were any hiccups or things that you had foreseen that could happen that you were able to address and they didn't become issues?
Well, the good thing is we have a great team in the Secretary's office, and also we have a great relationship with the registrars. So the planning happens very early. Last minute trainings for the new registrars, a lot of questions and answers between our election officers and the local election workers. And they also help each other, which is wonderful. So we weren't expecting any hiccups, except maybe with our election management system, which is the portal that most voters might be used to if they go to our website to get election results. It's old technology. We're in the process of doing an upgrade, and the new one will roll out next summer. But we were a little fearful that it might go down, so we had a backup plan in place, but good news, it worked. So nothing major reported, and my biggest takeaway is always, I wish more people voted. The turnout is very low. In some towns, it's as low as 5% turnout for choosing who might represent their city.
Right. Yeah. Voting is just so important. It's a right not to be taken for granted.
Yeah.
So our big next election date is November the 7th.
November 7th.
And lots of municipal candidates like myself are on the ballot.
Yes.
And what preparations have been taking place for making certain that this election runs just as smoothly as the primaries did?
Same thing. The primaries were my first major election, although we have had 4 smaller elections this year. So I thought it went very well, but you can always tweak a system. So I think we will do a better job about getting some information out to the news media. On primary day, for example, I saw 2 news articles that had incorrect information about how people could register to vote on the day of the primary, which is not the case. They can do that in a general election, but not for a primary. So right away we said, going into the next cycle, let's make sure we get out a very detailed, factual one sheet to all media outlets, so that if they are writing stories, they have the right information. So we'll be doing a briefing. The primaries were a couple of days ago. Everyone is touching base internally, and we're going to meet next week to put any other new systems into place that might help ensure that it's very smooth.
So one of your major jobs as the constitutional officer, as Secretary of State, is to be Connecticut's chief election official. And I think people throughout the country are quite familiar with seeing and hearing from Secretary of States in various jurisdictions. So why don't we just have a brief discussion about your role to make certain, as Chief Election Officer, that the elections are fair and secure, that there's integrity, to make certain that every vote is counted. So what things do you want to concentrate on and ensure to make certain that the process is, quote, legitimate?
Sure. And before I answer that, I do feel like most people watch national news, and it's really confusing because they don't necessarily focus on the fact that states administer elections very differently. Every single state is different. And a lot of the things we hear in the national news, most states have a county form of government. Many states have hired professional county election clerks. So it's just very different. Here in Connecticut, each one of our 169 towns have two registrars of voters, one Democrat, one Republican, who are elected. They are paid by the town, and essentially they are a town employee. So I like to explain that because people will call me, even registrars will call me and say, I'm having this issue. Can you tell my colleague or my town that I need X? I can't.
Right.
They actually don't work for us. What our role is to make sure that they are following the letter of federal law, state law, and if we become aware of any malfeasance, that we report that to the investigatory department, which is also not our office. So we are doing many different types of things to make sure those local election workers don't make any mistakes. So I think in terms of training, election workers, making sure they have access to training, that they can get their questions answered, that quickly and correctly, making sure that new registrars have the support that they need to get up to speed. I also think in terms of infrastructure, you know, it's no accident that the Department of Homeland Security, for example, stood up a new department, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, after the 2016 elections, because hacking happens every day. Any corporation will tell you that. You know, we've all seen in our own personal lives increased ransomware, phishing, etc. So our office is trying to make sure all of this information about best practices, about security, are being pushed down to the local level. And in fact, moving into 2024, we will start to have more convenings that also bring in the security branches, like Connecticut's Emergency Services Department, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, local IT departments, law enforcement, etc., to make sure we're not all operating in separate silos. And then lastly, I think about voter education. Most people don't realize the Secretary of the State has $0 for public education and public outreach. Zero. So that means voters make mistakes often. One of the most interesting cases I heard about was a gentleman, an elderly gentleman in Florida. He had a home in Florida, a home in Connecticut. And it came up in the cross-reference that happens, like some of the security checks, that he had voted twice, once in Florida, once in Connecticut. And you think, oh my gosh. So the good thing is we have systems where we find this out, and an investigation was launched. He was called in, and he said, oh, well, in Florida, where I live most of the time, I voted for all the local people, and in Connecticut, I voted for the national position. And we're like, you can't do that. But he literally didn't know. He thought he was doing the right thing. So it's really important that we do as much as we can to educate voters. I always advocate that we as voters should be letting our legislature know that we would like public education funded. Until we can get all of these rules and regulations out. Like I said, the press put out 2 incorrect articles. So this type of thing wouldn't happen if we had more resources for education. So I'm doing what I can that's free and available, and I think we're doing a lot, but more could be done.
I couldn't agree more that voter education is paramount to successful elections.
Yes.
I think that whatever we can do as town clerks or registrar of voters to assist you
Yes.
in obtaining those funds necessary would be dollars well spent.
Absolutely.
And so you've got my commitment to be an ally in this, to get more information. That's an easy ask, and I think as you're a new person in the role, you find things that, well, why didn't we ever do this before? And it's something that definitely should have been done. Earlier you mentioned you had about 75 people that work in your office, and obviously elections is just one portion of your role. So how many people are involved on the election side of the operation?
Very few, actually. And again, most people don't realize we only have 9 people in our elections division. We have over 45 people in our business services division, and then support staff, IT, human resources make up the difference. Business services is the bread and butter of the organization, as you might say. So every business, nonprofit, etc. formation flows through our office. As I said, we get a lot of calls, so our help desk is always busy, and we're always following up, making sure people are registered correctly, paying whatever fees they should have paid. And it's interesting, I'm going to go on a little sidebar. You know, as a secretary, you know, national news is consumed with this idea about election fraud, although it has never proven to be credible. But no one talks about business fraud, which is actually becoming one of the biggest problems in the business community worldwide. Many businesses form, and then maybe something happens, the owner decides to close it, but they don't do it properly. So bad actors from crime groups, foreign actors, etc., take on that identity, apply for loans, get money, etc. It's a huge crisis that many states are trying to work on now, as is the federal government. So I will just put a plug out there that if you are a business owner and you had an LLC, a LP, a corporation, and you didn't dissolve it properly, please contact our office and make sure you do so.
No, very, very, very good point, well taken. It was informative for me to learn that only 9 people of the staff are involved in elections, and I think I've interacted with most of them so far in my short tenure. But what I've noticed is that they're very well trained.
Yes.
They're highly knowledgeable about all the intricacies of the process. And what people ask me, say, well, how do you like your job? And I say, I love my job. And they say, why? I said, it's very statutory.
Yes.
So the rules are the same regardless of who you are.
Exactly.
And that's one of the beauties of being town clerk, and it's also probably a very good thing about being Secretary of State.
It really is, and people, you know, I always laugh, and I use the word nonpartisan, which I think is just easy, like, word to use, but I think you captured it very nicely. The rules are the rules. And it's so important for any of us in this space to follow the letter of the law, make sure we are operating with the highest level of integrity and transparency and ethics. And I think that is something I bring to the role. I think that is something every election worker I know brings to the role. So thank you for your work.
So, and on another note, the business side is the revenue generator.
Yes.
And the same in town clerk's office, land records and birth, marriage, death certificates. Those are revenue generators for the town. The election portion and our role there, there isn't really no dollars generated. It's basically probably more dollars out than one can really anticipate, but it's so essential that it's done right and that the staff understands that. So we strike a good balance in our office, and we always ask people to have a little bit more patience with us when it gets into what we quote election season.
Yes, yes.
So whether it be candidates, the parties, or the public in general.
Busy.
It's very, very busy.
But yeah, everything is very meticulous and detailed. It has to be done correctly.
Right, and everything is recorded properly and noted properly and time stamped in and attention to detail, because we don't want to make any errors.
Exactly.
And that's held to a very high standard that we aim to meet. one of the things you talked about was voter education, and one of the things that I think voters sometimes may struggle with is how do you register to vote? A lot of people know that they can go to their town hall and they can go to the Register of Voters office, but I think in Connecticut there's probably other avenues to allow a individual who's over the age of 18
Yes.
To vote. So what kind of ways can they do that, and what kind of identification materials do they need to bring to become a registered voter?
Sure. So you can register online in Connecticut. So if you go to myvote.ct.gov, you can enter your information and it gets sent through the computer backend to your local registrar. They process that, send you a confirmation, etc. There are many agencies that are considered voter registration agencies, like the Department of Social Services, by way of example. All of those offices usually have voter registration forms on hand that you could ask for. Obviously, there are many advocacy groups who, even our office, who go out into the community, like at fairs and festivals, and we bring voter registration forms. And then, as you mentioned, going to your registrar's office. Those are the easiest ways. And we get this question a lot, especially people get assaulted, I'll say, with inundated, maybe is a better word, with mail from candidates. And people are always saying, can I remove all this information from my voter file? So some you can, some you can't, obviously. The way voters are tracked is either through your DMV number or your Social Security number. You are allowed to use your last four to register if you don't have a license. If you do have a license, you can use that. But that's how data is matched, and that's how we one of the ways we find duplicates. So you do have to provide that information.
So we are a few months out from November 7th. So what would you encourage voters to do today to check on their status of being a voter, so that on election day they're not surprised that they're not at the wrong place or they're not on the rolls, worst case scenario?
A lot of problems could be solved if people just check this stuff in advance. A lot of people think they're registered, but they're not, because, for example, maybe they registered, they filled out something wrong on the form, and like I said, a registrar will send the mailer to confirm that data. And then come to find out you did not answer that mailer, so you show up to vote, guess what? You're not registered. So check your registration. It won't be relevant for November, but a lot of people don't realize that they did not read the screen carefully at the DMV. So even if, so I'm a registered Democrat, I renew my license or something at the DMV, a screen comes up saying, do you want to enroll in a party? And I'm just in a rush and I say no. I'm now no longer a registered Democrat. So people forget that they need to make sure to declare their party. People don't realize that their polling place could change based on each census. So if you haven't voted since 2021, you have to check your polling place to make sure you know where to go. You can do all of that and more at myvote.ct.gov. And I would also say now is the time to start paying attention to who is running so that you have time to do research. When I was running for office as a state representative and outdoor knocking, the number one question I got, is there one place I can go and get all the information on every candidate? And in most towns, the answer is no. So you need some time to do that research. So I encourage everyone to start now, because it's not a few months away, it's about 7 weeks away. So do your research now, and that'll make a much smoother process.
Perfect. That was a great answer and very informative. West Hartford has a very active, engaged electorate. We traditionally have high turnouts for presidential and state elections, and lesser extent on municipal elections. What do you think towns like us could do to encourage even higher participation rates.
You know, this is such a frustration for me. And like you said, West Hartford is one of the good towns. Although, just so people understand, I think for presidentials, your turnout is about 85%. For statewide elections, state positions like state rep, state senate, it's about 56, 57%. But for municipal elections like mayor, board, council, etc., it drops to about 37%. And to say that you have some of the best turnout is saying a lot about the state of our local elections. When I'm talking to people, every issue I hear people talk about, property taxes, mill rates, how are Board of Education dollars being spent in my town, on what kind of buildings can be built in my town, how much access we have to green space, open space, what's happening in our parks and playgrounds. These are all local issues, but when you look at those numbers, only 36% are weighing in on that, whereas 80-something% are weighing in as the president. I would say the local issues impact your everyday life a lot more, and it's a great frustration of mine that no one votes. If you went to anyone and said, this person is going to determine everything about your everyday life, and 100 people get to decide how that's going to work, and if I told you only 6 people showed up to cast that vote, well, that's what's happening in towns all around Connecticut. So even here in West Hartford, 36 people are showing up. And then people wonder why government doesn't seem to represent them, because most of them is not showing up to say what they want. So even West Hartford has room for improvement is my takeaway line.
I agree, and having served on the town council for 15 and a half years, I would agree that all politics are local. And I would always say to people, get involved, join a run for council, run for board, volunteer on a board or commission, but more importantly, vote in the local election, because it's too late after the election to say, well, I don't really think the mill rate should be that high, or I don't think the council should have approved this without looking at that. So there's a lot of opportunities for your voice to be heard.
And you're touching on something, if you don't mind, I'll opine a little bit. I've been reading this book by Richard Haas called The Bill of Obligations. And we always talk about voting rights and voting. And his book aligns with what I believe, which is we also have a broader obligation to society. We live in a representative democracy, which never said you just vote and then abdicate all responsibility and then just sit on the sidelines and complain, right? Like, we have an obligation to participate beyond voting. So yes, we have to vote, but we have to research who we're voting for. We have to ask the right questions of them. After we elect them, we have to follow up and find out if they're voting the way they said they would. We have to let them know what's important to us, because they can't know all things. So we have a broader obligation as a member of this society than just voting and sitting back. And I think the more people adopt that way of thinking, the more likely it is that we'll have policies that represent the will of the people.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Why don't we talk about disinformation?
Sure.
You mentioned recently in the primary that some news sources were reporting incorrect information. So what proactive steps do you have in place to address anything that may occur with the presidential preference primary, and more importantly, with the November 2024 presidential election?
I mean, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation are, I would say, is the biggest security issue that the federal government is concerned about. And there are slight differences, but broadly speaking, there's information that is out there that people share, repeat, that is incorrect through no fault of their own. And that's like the media stories I mentioned. They didn't do it on purpose, they just got it wrong. But then there are bad actors out there trying to sway people's minds. So for the bad actors, we are monitoring the dark web, social media, etc., to make sure that information that is a misstatement of fact is known to us, and if we have to counter it, we can. For misinformation, we're just trying to educate voters. We are trying to set up our website as the trusted source of information, so that if you have a doubt, like, oh, can I register on primary day? You can check our website and get the actual facts. So that's a very brief way of dealing with a very large problem.
Okay, super. I see we're coming to almost the end of our time allotted here, so we'll definitely have to have you back to talk about early voting, presidential preference primary, hopefully a very favorable update on tabulators. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to visit us here in West Hartford. And I was enlightened by many of the things that you told us this morning, and I'm certain that our viewers will find it equally engaging and informative. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.